The drum set is a union of several individual drum instruments. It usually consists of a kick drum, a snare drum, hi-hats, toms, a ride, and cymbals. Because a drum set is recorded in a room with all of the individual drum instruments bleeding into each other's microphones, the recorded track should be locked to one another. You should treat the drums as one single instrument and avoid moving individual tracks, which would cause phasing issues if done improperly. Besides interfering with their original recorded phase relationship, moving individual hits from their original time position will disconnect them audibly from the microphone bleed in the other tracks, and therefore unintentionally cause what is called a flam or double hit. When the phase or polarity of two audio tracks is similar, like in two kick tracks, you will have to identify if these signals are canceling each other's frequencies out, in particular in the low end. Phase issues take practice to identify by ear, especially if it's only slightly off, but they become obvious when the signal is 180 degrees out of phase or has opposite polarity. A much easier way to check the phase of two similar or what should be phase coherent tracks is to zoom in and compare the waveforms. If the curves are moving simultaneously up and down, your audio is in phase. If the two waveforms are moving in opposite directions, then the tracks are considered out of phase. There are many degrees of out of phase, but once identified, tracks can be easily adjusted either by flipping the phase or nudging one of the tracks. An example would be two recordings of the same kick drum that will produce slightly different waveforms depending on the distance of the microphone to the source or even the microphones themselves. The task is to align the beginning of the waveforms and listen carefully to the changing sound as you nudge around. If the sound becomes fuller, then you're probably nudging towards the right direction, and if it starts to sound thinner, you're probably nudging towards the wrong direction. If your session contains two kick tracks, two snare tracks, or both, you should ensure that the kicks and snares are in phase with each other. Slight adjustments will be done most likely through nudging, while vast adjustments might be done by flipping the phase or polarity switch on a dynamic processing plugin. The microphones that capture the cymbals and rides are called the overheads. Located over the cymbals, they will capture the cymbals accurately, but also include the entire drum set. This is reason enough why they should be your main focus when imaging the individually captured drum tracks. The two terms we use to label the layouts are drummer perspective and audience perspective. If the drummer is right-handed, you would hear the hi-hat favoring the left-hand side in drummer's perspective. Conversely, you would hear the hi-hat favoring the right-hand side in audience perspective. Listen carefully to the soloed and panned overhead tracks to identify the perspective and adjust your individual tracks to match the positioning of the drums in the overheads. This will maintain proper imaging of the drums and also support the phase coherency of the overheads with the rest of the drums. If it is hard to identify because the microphones were not positioned correctly, use your best judgment or look for possible tracking notes of the previous engineer. Drummers have a certain level of dynamics that gives the recording a feel different from what most programmed drums can produce. This feel often results in undesirable and inconsistent levels on kicks and snares. Several manual methods and automatic plugins are available to fix inconsistent levels. Commercial plugins like Sound Replacer or Drumagog can identify the transients of a drum track and create a new track from whatever drum sound you choose, even incorporating the previous dynamic feel of the drummer. Though these work excellent in most cases, ghost notes are very hard to identify and often are missed by these plugins. Ghost notes are the small rolls, accents, and hits that a drummer naturally performs on the snare in between the main hits, and that gives the drums the live feel and groove that they possess. This is why the most basic and secure method to do sound replacement is by hand. With the snare tracks grouped, use tab the transient to locate the zero crossing at the beginning of a snare hit and then copy it, pasting it with the same tab to transient method over weak hits. This is a simple and error-free method. When trimming and crossfading, take into consideration the length of the sample and the bleed of the other drums. When done properly, the result can vastly improve the consistency of the sound and make it easier to mix the drums into the song. After doing phase alignment and sound replacement, the timing of the performance can sometimes use a little tweaking. Elastic Audio gives you the ability to quantize audio just like you quantize MIDI. Considering all the drum tracks as one instrument, you should first create a group of the drums to avoid the previously discussed issues with phasing and double hits that could most certainly happen. Once grouped, change the Elastic Audio plugin on any of the drum tracks to Rhythmic, and let Pro Tools load and analyze the transients of all the drum tracks. By switching the view to Analysis View, you will be able to see all of the event markers that Pro Tools creates for all the transients it finds. Quantizing at this point without adjusting the sensitivity would result in wobble and other undesirable changes in the audio. With all of the drum tracks selected, open the Elastic Properties window and change your sensitivity settings to be slightly above where the analysis starts to deselect kicks and snares. It is important for each track to have identical sensitivity settings. This is why I recommend that you check the settings of each track individually after doing the previous step. Press Option 0 to open the Time Operation window and select Quantize. Change the quantize value to 16th note. You also have the option to change the strength of the quantization to a lower value than 100% to avoid killing the feel and groove of the drums. However, if quantized sequenced drum tracks are already present in your session, I recommend that you use full strength when you're quantizing to avoid flams or double hits between the live and sequenced drums. Once quantized, listen carefully throughout the entire song to identify possible issues like audio wobble or double hits. If you find issues, switch your view to Analysis and delete event markers from the questionable area until it sounds better. Remember to keep the tracks grouped throughout this entire process. While most of the drum tracks are played fairly continuously, toms are more typically played during drum fills leading into new sections of a song. When the toms are not being played, issues can come up like audio bleed from other drums or sympathetic ringing of the toms from other instruments. To fix this, engineers used to insert a gate on the audio track. The gate's output would be closed until the tom sounded, which would open the gate's output by exceeding its set threshold. This dynamic processing method needs a signal to react to, which results in missing the immediate transient attack of the tom hit. Now, while it is true that some gate plugins found in DAWs may have a pre-listen function to avoid the loss of the first transient, the safest method to get rid of this unwanted audio is simply to erase it. The strip silence feature in Pro Tools can eliminate the sound between the tom hits, but its result is often unsatisfactory and incomplete, especially if there's a snare or cymbal bleed on the tom tracks that's as loud as the tom hits themselves. You should be careful when using strip silence and ensure that you did not eliminate necessary tom hits by mistake. The best way to check this is to solo the overhead tracks while visually inspecting the tom tracks during playback. If you hear a tom hit in the overheads but don't see a tom hit on the individual tom track, you'll have to fix your edit. Editing the unwanted audio by hand gives you more control and the ability to trim and fade each hit individually. When trimming the individual tom tracks, you should be careful to not eliminate the natural ring of the toms. Letting the tom ring naturally is more important than erasing a snare hit after the tom, which would be reduced with an appropriate fade. Though every tom resonates differently, the minimum size for each medium tom clip is about this much. And the minimum size to edit a floor tom clip should be about this much. At this point, you should have addressed most of the major issues when it comes to editing drums. This includes fixing phasing issues, replacing weak hits with stronger hits, panning the drums to their appropriate places, quantizing timing issues, and eliminating unwanted ringing in the tom tracks. At this point, you should take the time and carefully listen to the entire song. Turn on the music track, but turn down the volume so you can clearly hear the drums. Change your display to either bars and beats or minutes and seconds, and take notes whenever you hear an issue, no matter how small. It is best to address everything now and fix them before you start mixing.